So we stopped on page 53 of the book, and we will continue. So how is it that Radha Damodara are in a park, accepting the offerings of people who have no idea who they are? Where is their temple? Only 10 years ago, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami had left Radha Damodar Mandir for America with a dream. By 1975, he has already fulfilled the desire of his spiritual master and the predecessor acharyas. ISKCON now, a worldwide organization, ISKCON is now a worldwide organization of temples committed to propagating the message of Krishna as revealed in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya Sankirtana mission has spread to every town and village against the backdrop of a world with changing values. How did this come about in so short a time? How does one start a worldwide movement based on the principle of abstinence from illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, and gambling, when the entire population is addicted to these vices? Srila Prabhupada, with the vision of an empowered incarnation, accepted the responsibility to sustain and expand the Lord's mission, just as the predecessor Acharya has done. He handed over the Sankirtan mission to the young men and women of America and entrusted it to their care. To fully understand how this miracle was accomplished, let's go back and take a look at America just 10 years earlier. Boston, 1965. In the early 1960s, much of what we learned from TV. We watched the Vietnam War on TV. It became a TV war with commercials. When we got tired of the news, we switched the channel. But the troops in Vietnam couldn't switch the channel when they got fed up with the war. Instead, they turned to alcohol or drugs. The prosperity of the 60s gave Americans the highest standard of living in the world. Communication satellites allowed us to see the world as a global community. College campuses were still quiet. Getting good grades and good jobs was the goals. Avoiding the draft was another goal. In the autumn of 1965, the Pope came to America for the first time with a big splash. It was a major event with full media coverage. He addressed the United Nations in New York and held a Mass for Peace at Yankee Stadium. September 17, 1965. After 35 days at the sea, the stamp ship Jaladuta quietly glides into Boston Harbor at 5:30 a.m. As the dawn brights light to the city of Boston, an unknown Vaishnava sannyasi steps onto American soil. It's a small step for a sannyasi, but a giant leap for mankind. With this step, he inaugurates the beginning of the worldwide Hare Krishna movement, which had been prophesied for centuries. He is the great ambassador from the spiritual sky, a revolutionary who does not accept the version of reality given by modern science. Rather, he sees a fundamental flaw in their body of knowledge. Humans are spiritual beings who have become entangled and trapped within matter. The timeless solution is for men and women to reestablish their original spiritual nature and loving relationship with the Supreme Being. His mission is to defeat the entire atheistic premise of the Western civilization and establish Sri Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the chosen one, empowered by Krishna to fulfill the ancient prophecy. He enters the fabric of American society like a needle. No one is aware of his presence. Because he comes quietly and humbly, he can hear the heartbeat of America. His work begins in New York City, struggling against the atheistic tide, where many embrace the idea that God is dead. On November 10, a massive blackout shrouds the city. People are trapped in subway trains and elevators for hours in darkness, symbolic of their spiritual condition. Srila Prabhupada is the lamp to light their way. New York, January 1966. The entire New York City transit system strikes, bringing the city to a halt again. Prabhupada regrets our useless dependence on technology. A quarter million American youths are now fighting in Southeast Asia. American troops have advanced technology, but it is mostly useless in a guerrilla war. The cost of Vietnam is 2.5 billion monthly. The public is outraged. Bhaktivedanta Swami struggles to establish a Vaishnava center among many other competing views. Yogis, Swamis, and Gurus promising love and peace are popular with young people who hang out at the bookstores and coffee houses in Greenwich Village. At Madison Square Garden, a young poet sings his songs of hope, capturing the mood of a generation. Yeah, how many years can people exist before they are allowed to be free? How many times must a man turn his head, pretending he just doesn't see? How many times must a cannibal fire before it's forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. This is a song by Bob Dylan, Blowing in the Wind. Fed up with the contradictions and hypocrisy of a world gone mad, he voices his anger. His tone is full of energy, but he doesn't know who is behind the wind, nor how to fulfill the goal of life. Words without deeds remain only words. March 1966. On Sunday, March 6, Prabhupada spends the day alone in his room reflecting on his present situation. He expresses his inner thoughts in his diary. According to Mayapur Panjika, today is Adivas day of Gaur Purnima. Devotees at Vrindavan and Navadvip are enjoying this celebration. I am here alone without any devotee companion, but I have come here to serve the Lord and not for personal happiness. I am prepared to live in hell even, if I am able to serve the Lord. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted that his mission should be propagated all over the world, and that is my objective. I don't mind the inconvenience personally felt. Monday is the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, and Prabhupada observes fasting until 5:30 p.m., when he breaks the fast by taking fruit and milk. In the evening, he gives a talk on Bhagavad Gita and closes with kirtan. He receives $28 from donation and sales of books. June 1966. Dr. Timothy Leary, a former Howard professor, urges people to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Little plays are presented nightly around the East Village called An Evening with God. It turns out to be Leary on stage, talking about powerful experiments going on in the upstate town of Millbrook, how to discover God through LSD. Alternatively, you can attend a lecture on Bhagavad Gita at Matchless Gifts, a 22nd Avenue storefront. The corporate culture dropouts protesting US involvement in Vietnam join the counterculture. As they drop out, Prabhupada is there to catch them and provide shelter. He teaches the frustrated, confused youth of America how to attain spiritual consciousness by chanting Hare Krishna, eating prasadam, and rendering devotional service. They preach to the same crowd, but Prabhupada's integrity and purity attracts the people who reject hypocrisy. The cream of America's youth joins his movement. Allen Ginsberg, the poet laureate of the Beat generation, is favorable to both camps. He likes Srila Prabhupada and chants Hare Krishna, but is ostensibly a follower of Leary. Leary publishes a pamphlet, Start Your Own Religion, promoting the promise of a new awareness in terms of consciousness expansion, which is distributed throughout the East Village bookstores and coffee houses. He creates the League for Spiritual Discovery to experiment with psychedelic and hallucinogens, depending on funds granted by the Howard University. July 11, 1966. After 10 difficult months, Srila Prabhupada incorporates the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He depends only on his Guru Maharaj as he introduces the process of Bhakti Yoga under the direct order of Lord Chaitanya. The Sankirtan movement is being transplanted to a storefront on 26 Second Avenue. The U.S. steps up its involvement in Vietnam, bombing Hanoi and Haiphong on July 29. Several allied countries expressed their regret. The United Nations Secretary General criticizes American policy in Southeast Asia. At home, the US Senate joins in condemnation. Peace marches and rallies by pacifist groups oppose the war. September 8, 1966. Janmashtami is observed at the storefront. For the first time in America, the traditional Vaishnava initiation into the eternal disciplic succession, complete with Vedic fire sacrifice, is given to 11 new aspirants, Hayagriva, Umapati, Rayarama, Mukunda, and Janaki. And they will play a major role in these early days. The next day is the appearance day of Srila Prabhupada. He is 70. In the morning, he requests Mukunda and Janaki to marry. Janaki's sister comes from Oregon to help prepare for the wedding. It is more unique happening. An American couple is married by a sannyasi according to Vaishnava rites. A second round of initiation is held 2 weeks later on Radhashtami. It is another festive occasion. 4 others are initiated into the eternal disciplic succession. They are Satsvarupa, Kirtanananda, Achyutananda, and Brahmananda, a huge fellow with an equally huge appetite. Srila Prabhupada is now ready to introduce Sankirtan to the public. He takes his Kirtan party to Washington Square Park on Sunday morning, but the chanting attracts only a small crowd due to harassment from the police. October 9, 1966. Prabhupada is far more successful when he brings his Sankirtan to Tompkins Square Park. Today, the park is crowded with young people as the devotees roll out their oriental rug. They sit down with their instruments, harmonium and karatals. Srila Prabhupada sits with them and plays a bongo drum. An audience begins to gather. Soon everyone is swaying along the rhythmic pulse of the kirtan. The local park musicians saunter over to join in. Before long, everyone is chanting and dancing with the devotees. The New York Times features the story the next day with a photograph of the Swami and his flock. That evening, the temple is filled with guests for the kirtan and lecture. Soon there are 4 more initiates, Rupanuga, Gargamuni, Damodara, and a young artist, Jadurani. Prabhupada immediately engages her in painting a portrait of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. When the weather gets too cold to go to the park, Prabhupada introduces the Sunday feast. Within a few weeks, the storefront is filled with hungry guests attracted by the prasadam, acclaimed to be out of this world. New adherents like Paramananda and Rancher are eager to share their spiritual lifestyle, and soon the temple Sankirtan begins to invade Millbrook. Mohanananda. I had dropped out of school in 1966 at age 14. I had gotten one of the Leary's pamphlets and went up to study with him in Millbrook. 4 of us were living in teepees and few people lived in the main house. I remember walking through the woods one time and seeing Paramananda with a picture of Krishna attached to a tree, just chanting away in the middle of this entire wilderness with little karatals. It was the most blissful scene. We began talking, and he was my first introduction to Krishna consciousness. Eventually, we had pictures of Krishna everywhere, and we were chanting in a little teepee temple with karatals that Paramananda had brought up. Now that he has few assistants, Prabhupada wants to revive back to Godhead. Brahmananda's younger brother, Gargamuni, locates 2 small mimeograph machines that Prabhupada agrees to purchase. The first issue is soon ready to print. With Hayagriva, the college English teacher, and Rayarama, the professional writer, as co-editors. 100 copies of the 28-page magazine are run off in the Starfront. Prabhupada instructs them to produce it monthly. Work sincerely and make it as big as Time magazine. He requests Hagriva. Brahmananda and Gargamuni go out that evening and distribute every copy. One evening, a record producer visits the storefront after reading about the Swami in the newspapers. He finds the kirtan mystical and absorbing. He wants to discuss the possibility of cutting a record. Prabhupada is immediately interested. Yes, we must record. We must record. If it will help us distribute the chanting of the Hare Krishna, then it is our duty. December 1966. A day before the recording date, a guest arrives at the storefront carrying a dolak, a two-headed wooden drum from India. Immediately, Prabhupada's interest is piqued and he requests to play the drum. The visitor obviously wants to play it himself, so Brahmananda approaches him. Swamiji wants to play the drum. Seeing the size of Brahmananda, the hippie relents. Brahmananda. Swamiji began to play, and his hands were just dancing on the drum. Everyone was stunned that Swamiji knew how to do this. All we had seen was the bongo drum, so I thought it was the proper Indian drum. But then this two-headed drum came out of nowhere, and Swamiji started playing it like a master musician. It created an ecstasy 100 times more than the bongo drum had. After the kirtan, Prabhupada asks to borrow the drum for tomorrow's recording session. It is a cold winter evening as Prabhupada and 15 devotees get into Rupanuga's van with their instruments for the drive to the studio. Entering the studio, they feel confident that they can reproduce their storefront sound. The studio engineers accept them as a regular band. Someone asks the name of their group. The Hare Krishna chanters, says Haigriva in a joking mood. The session goes smoothly. The producer is excited. It is an authentic sound. It might even sell. Now you have made your best record, Prabhupada tells to the producer as they leave the studio. The album Krishna Consciousness by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami on the Happening label will influence many people, including the Beatles. It is the Brihat Mridanga, the great Mridanga, a phrase coined by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur for the printing press for the psychedelic age. In the 5 months since registering ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada has initiated 20 disciples, published 3 issues of Back to Godhead magazine, published 4 essays, Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure, Who is Crazy, The Peace Formula, and Introduction to Gita Upanishad, recorded an album, introduced Street Sankirtan, introduced the Sunday Love Feast, performed a Vedic wedding, and finished his translation and commentary of Bhagavad Gita as it is. ISKCON is only one little storefront, yet Prabhupada is confident that the mission of his Guru Maharaj will be successful. New York, January 1967. Mukunda and Janaki had left for the West Coast right after their marriage. Now, early in the new year, Prabhupada receives a letter from California. Mukunda has rented a storefront in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, at the center of a scene he describes as a youth renaissance much bigger than in New York. We are busy converting it into a temple now, he writes. People are coming from all over the country for a human be-in at the Golden Gate Park, a gathering of the tribes for a youthful powwow and peace dance. Along with Allen Ginsberg, Mukunda is also busy organizing a mantra rock dance at the Avalon Ballroom with the most famous bands in San Francisco. He wants Srila Prabhupada and the chanting of Hare Krishna to be the main attraction. A plane ticket is enclosed along with the letter. Originally, Mukunda had located the matchless gifts storefront and helped the Swami move in. Now in California, he is attempting to build on the success of New York. To dismay of his New York followers, Prabhupada announces his intention to fly out to San Francisco. This will be his first trip on an airplane. San Francisco, January 16, 1967. Srila Prabhupada follows the disembarking passengers from the terminal gate into the arrivals lounge. He enters to the sound of Hare Krishna chanted by a crowd of hippies dressed in Moroccan kaftans, Mexican ponchos, patchwork jeans, buckskins, double-breast velvet dandy coats, paisley robes, and other original creations. Long strings of beads are draped over Japanese silk samurai robes and white off-the-shoulder peasant blouses. Many wear small wire-rimmed sunglasses in various colors and shapes. Everybody has long, flowing hair. Prabhupada smiles broadly, astonished to see so many people with the holy name on their lips. They are greeting him with kirtan, and he hasn't even said a word. As soon as they see the Swami, everyone bows down, feeling confident it's the right thing to do. Allen Ginsberg steps forward to offer a large bouquet of roses. Dozens of hands extend to give flowers or incense. Following the Swami to the baggage claim, the chanters begin anew. While waiting for his bags, Srila Prabhupada lifts his arm and begins to dance, swaying gracefully from side to side. The crowd responds with sequels of delight and enthusiastic bursts of energy. Prabhupada dances in ecstasy, and the beautiful people chant and dance with him. To the startled travelers at the airport, the whole phantasmagoria of Ashbury has manifested at the baggage claim. They escort the Swami outside to a black 1949 Cadillac waiting at curbside. The day is bright and sunny, much warmer than cold, wintry New York. Sitting in the back seat with Mukunda and Ellen, Prabhupada distributes roses through the open window to the chanting revelers. Slowly the car pulls away from the curb as the flower children scurry off to follow the Swami in their own vehicles. As the Cadillac negotiates the freeway into San Francisco, Prabhupada chants with Mukunda and Ellen. He is pleased to see Lord Chaitanya's prophecy already manifesting in this West Coast city. He especially values Mukunda's help in spreading the Hare Krishna mantra. Lord Chaitanya had predicted his movement would spread worldwide, yet few people in India could understand how it could be embraced by mlechas and yavanas. Had the attempt of a sannyasi sent to London in 1932 by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati not failed, they had returned convinced that Westerners could not follow the regulative principles of devotional service. But now Lord Chaitanya is revealing that the prophecy will indeed be fulfilled. Similarly, Lord Krishna had informed Arjuna that he should simply perform his duty, as the battle had already been fought and won by his arrangement. Bhagavad Gita 11:33. The Cadillac pulls up in front of 518 Frederick Street. In the window is a sign, Radha Krishna Temple. The small storefront is decorated by a few plants and a madras here and there. A hippie throng fills the small room. Sitting on an oversized cushion, Srila Prabhupada begins kirtan. After a short talk encouraging everyone to take up Krishna consciousness, he is escorted to an apartment next door, followed by reporters from San Francisco's two major newspapers, the Chronicle and the Examiner. He seizes the opportunity to preach. The big mistake of modern civilization is to encroach upon others' property as though it were one's own. This creates an unnatural disturbance. God is the ultimate proprietor of everything in the universe. When people know that God is the ultimate proprietor, the best friend of all living entities, and the object of all offerings and sacrifices, then there will be peace. This is an extract from the peace formula. The Swami's arrival at the airport is the feature of the evening news on Channel 4. The same story is in the papers next morning. Almost everybody knows that a Swami is in town, as both dailies cover Prabhupada's arrival. The mantra rock dance is advertised throughout Hey Ashbury with Swami Bhaktivedanta as a headliner, even though nobody knows much about him. The Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin are the other headliners. The hippies in the Hey talk about it on the streets, in the hat shops, and at the local hangouts. With Ginsburg's help, Mukunda has done a wonderful propaganda job. The rest of San Francisco doesn't give it a second thought, however, except for a young man leafing through the evening paper. He is frustrated with life, simply driving a taxi cab. Nothing seems fulfilling or satisfying. A holy man from India opens temple, maybe. Back in June of '62, after accepting his degree in mechanical engineering at Ohio State University, Jim Core has immediately jumped into his MG and left for the West Coast. All he had room for was his stereo and few clothes as he drove out to San Francisco to take up a job offer. This was years before the hippie scene arrived, but he didn't like the job and soon resigned, having no interest in joining the rat race of corporate life. Instead, he took to driving a cab, even though he had an engineering degree, to gain a little independence and time to think about his life. Occasionally, a passenger will ask, "Why don't you get a better paying job? You are an educated man. You could do far better than drive a cab." "Oh well, I just don't fit in with the upper class crowd," is his reply. He still feels hopeless and totally lost. Sometimes he opens a bottle to try and drown the loneliness. Out of despair, he once tried LSD to see what the fuss was all about. Years later, he recalled, "It made me more aware that there were a lot of different levels of consciousness." Mrs. Core. At the age of 4, he was taken to a service in what we call the big church in Dayton, Ohio. He was very restless, standing up in the sanctuary and looking around. His grandmother inquired, "Jimmy, what's wrong? What are you doing? What are you looking for?" "Where is God?" he replied. Born in 1939, he was raised in the Midwestern town of Dayton. His sister was 2 years younger. The family was very close, but no regular churchgoers. He had a lot of friends through his school years and took his first job working in the local grocery store while still in high school. As a high school senior, he was hired as a part-time mechanic in a garage and just loved it. He couldn't get too involved in sports because he suffered from asthma. He had tried desperately to join the football team, but just couldn't do it because of his difficulty in breathing. During his senior year, the family moved to Cleveland and he had to leave all his friends. Leaving friends behind was devastating for him. According to his mother, he closed up. That year, he suffered through a lot of disappointments. An asthma attack in the middle of an interview cost him a position at General Motors. At Ohio State, he wanted to join the Peace Corps, but his professors discouraged him, feeling it would be deadly if he was in some remote corner of the world with his asthmatic condition. In spite of the setbacks, he was very kind, caring, and friendly to everyone. One time, while flying back to Cleveland from New York, he and his mother met a young man from Germany who was coming to America for the first time. They started talking and quickly struck up a friendship. After landing at Cleveland Airport, Jim said, "We'll wait with you until your friends come to meet you." They waited a long time, but nobody came. Finally, Jim suggested, I'll tell you what, you come home with us. You have the telephone number of the people who are supposed to meet you, so we'll call them from my house. I'm not going to leave you here alone. They bundled up the young man and took him home. At Ohio State, he initially joined a fraternity, but it was too wild. He couldn't study with all the activity and noise, so he left and got a quiet place on his own. His one friend in college was Gurdeep Singh Chawla, a Sikh foreign exchange student from India, alone without any family in America. This was Jim's first exposure to Indian culture. Every year he brought his Sikh friend home from Christmas holidays, for Christmas holidays. Mr. Chawla. I had association with him at college when we roomed together. I always wondered, you see, he was more into spiritualism, not materialism. He always asked me about Indian culture, so he was looking for something beyond the meaning of the mundane, something to grasp the real meaning of life. Now at 28, he stands 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a strong build but a gentle demeanor. He's neither a hippie nor into drugs. Rather, he is a straight, clean-cut guy with short hair. After driving a cab for years, he worries. Where is my life going? What am I doing? I'm miserable. Life has no purpose, no meaning. I need something else in my life. He can't understand what is wrong, why he can't enjoy life as other people do. He gazes intently at the Swami's photograph in the newspaper. It brings to mind the face of a very ancient personality, a wise man. The Swami will be giving lectures on the science of God, the article states. Pondering the significance of the Swami's arrival, he puts the paper aside and scoops another helping of ice cream into his bowl. Jambavan. When he read that he felt when he read that he felt a ray of hope. He said, I felt a little ray of hope, and I remember a tear coming from my eye. I thought maybe this man can help me because I wanted to find happiness. He wanted to be happy, but he was miserable. Jayananda felt like a misfit in the material world. He was a devotee and he was living with non-devotees. He didn't know what the problem was, but he knew he wasn't happy. One of the few things he enjoys doing in the evening after driving the cab all day is to eat ice cream. He comes home and makes big ice cream sundaes with whipped cream, chocolate sauce, cherries, and different flavors of ice cream. This is his only pleasure, to have these fancy ice cream sundaes. Finishing up his ice cream, he makes a promise to attend the Swami's lecture on Friedrich Street. He's been driving a taxi for too long, going nowhere down a dead-end street. The following evening, he arrives at the temple to find he is at least 10 years older than the rest of the gathering, comprised mainly of hippies dressed to announce their rejection of establishment values. He appears conventional and immediately stands out, but he is also a seeker. His situation is more desperate than theirs. Mukunda. The first time I saw him on Frederick Street, I asked who he was, and he said he was a taxi driver. We were all hippies, and he was an older person, part of the establishment, short hair, just super straight. He'd wear a suit and tie sometimes, always neat and smart, quite a contrast from everyone else. He is instantly impressed at the first meeting with the Swami and purchases the 3-volume set of Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada autographs them to Sriman Jim Kaur. With tremendous faith and anticipation, he pores over the books at home, unable to put them down. Never has he read anything like this before. Taking up the serious study of this mature fruit of Vedic knowledge, he has a deep realization that this is what he had been searching for his whole life. The eternal truths enter into the core of his being, as revelation upon revelation fills his lonely heart. Washing away years of emptiness and dissatisfaction with life, he is filled with joy. Feeling enlivened, he becomes a regular at all the classes. He sees in Srila Prabhupada the embodiment of the Bhagavad verses. He has another deep realization that this saintly person is actually the living truth. the personified Bhagavatam, to whom he should surrender and dedicate the rest of his life. Mantra Rock Dance, January 29, 1967. Hayagriva and Kirtanananda arrive from New York for the Mantra Rock concert. They don't like the idea of Swamiji in a place full of drugged out hippies, pounding drums, screaming guitars, and wild light shows. Who will hear his message in this environment? Mukuda explains that it will be the first big event of the Aquarian age, complete with an authentic Swami from India. Thousands of young people will attend, and the fledgling San Francisco temple could get off to a big start financially. He and his friends have worked hard on this for a couple of months. Prabhupada sees it as an opportunity to spread the Hare Krishna mantra to thousands of young people searching for answers. Anyone who hears the chanting from the lips of a pure devotee can be saved from repeated birth and death. These hippie boys and girls are looking for a spiritual dimension in their lives, and he hears their cry. This is the reason he has come to America. The night of the concert, the crowd is lined up all the way down to the street and around the block. Timothy Leary arrives and is given a special seat on the stage next to Swami Kiryananda, who plucks a tambura. The devotees begin chanting melodiously as a warm-up act. Around 8 o'clock, Moby Grape begins their set with two drummers thundering a colossal beat to a booming bass and crunching guitar. As the pile-driven beat thunders out of a stack of 6-speaker amplifies with deafening insistence, blinding strobe lights flash in rhythm with the music, and the walls swim with projections of amoeba-like patterns slithering through the puddles of quivering color. In these permutations, the San Francisco sound encompasses everything from bluegrass to Indian ragas, from Bach to jug band music, often within the framework of a single song. The musicians improvise freely, building climax upon climax in songs that run on for 20 minutes or more. The light show enhances the rapture with swirling lights and pulsing blobs of color bouncing in time. Just as in other psychedelic lit joints, such as Andy Warhol's Gymnasium in Manhattan, the Avalon's aim is to immerse everyone in sound and sight. When the spell takes hold, dancers drift into private reveries, devising new ways of contorting their bodies, while here and there young mothers waltz dreamily around the floor with sleeping infants in their arms. But mostly everyone just sits on the floor, lost in their own hallucinations. At 9:30, Prabhupada leaves the temple accompanied by Kirtanananda and Ranchar. As they walk up the steps and enter the ballroom, devotees blow conch shells and someone starts a drum roll. The crowd parts down the center, forming a grand aisle like the Red Sea dividing for Moses. Prabhupada floats by, his head held high, as the crowd applauds and cheers. The light show flashes pictures of Krishna and his pastimes around the walls. Jagat Purusha. I was given a ticket by a friend who was with the show. I arrived late, just as Big Brother and the holding company were finishing their last song with Janis Joplin screaming away at the top of her lungs. I was standing around checking out the scene when there seemed to be a commotion at the back of the ballroom to the left. I turned to see Prabhupada entering. I had been over to the temple on Frederick Street a couple of times, so I recognized him from the pictures I had seen there. He looked so clean in that smoky atmosphere filled with hippies dressed in their exotic garb. He spoke for only about 3 minutes, and I remember him saying something like the chanting cleans the dust from the heart. As Prabhupada takes his seat on the stage, the crowd hushes. He asks Allen Ginsberg to speak first about the mantra. Then he gives a brief talk and requests Allen to start chanting. One by one, people in the audience catch on and start responding. The kirtan grows in intensity and the audience gets increasingly enthusiastic. Musicians from the Grateful Dead and Moby Grape jump back on the stage to accompany devotees and hippies chanting together. The Maha Mantra is projected on the walls and the chanting echoes throughout the cavernous hall as multicolored oil slicks pulse away to the beat of the kirtan. Some of the hippies hold hands and dance in circles. They do not understand the meaning of the mantra, but they can feel its potency. Allen Ginsberg. We sang Hare Krishna all evening. It was absolutely great. An open thing. It was the high of the high Ashbury spiritual enthusiasm. It was the first time that there had been a music scene in San Francisco where everybody could be part of it and participate. Everybody could sing and dance rather than listen to other people sing and dance. Seeing everybody dancing and chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada smiles with great happiness, even though most of them are intoxicated. The chanting is the medicine for the disease of material sense gratification. He had always stressed the chanting of Hare Krishna above all, as recommended by Srila Rupa Goswami. The holy name of Krishna is an attractive feature for many saintly liberated persons. It is the annihilator of all sinful reactions, and it is so powerful that save for the dumb who cannot chant, it is readily available to everyone, including the lowest type of man, the Chandala. The holy name of Krishna is the controller of the opulence of liberation, and it is identical with Krishna. Simply by touching the holy name with one's tongue, immediate effects are produced. Chanting the holy name does not depend on initiation, pious activities, or Purashcharya regulative principles generally observed before initiation. The holy name does not wait for all these activities. It is self-sufficient. This is from Padyavali 29 by Rupa Goswami, quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 15:110. As the intensity of the kirtan increases, Prabhupada takes over the lead from Ginsberg, with his voice resounding over the huge sound system. He begins perspiring heavily as the tempo picks up. Kirtanananda tries to stop the kirtan, insisting that Swamiji is too old for this. But Prabhupada chants on and on, faster and faster. Accompanied by the cream of San Francisco musicians, his voice leading the amplified guitars, bass, and drums, and the chorus of thousands. Jagat Purusha. Allen Ginsberg started chanting first, but then, at some point, Prabhupada took over. All these hippies were sitting in this smoke-filled ballroom, and a lot of them had some kind of a little instrument like bells, small hand drums, wooden flutes, and they started playing along with the kirtan. It seemed like the whole place became transported to a whole other dimension. The kirtan was so powerful, building up more and more, and everyone was chanting, dancing, and playing along. It seemed like a miracle. I felt like I was witnessing a miracle. Guru Das. The ballroom appeared as if it was a human field of wheat blowing in the wind. It produced a calm feeling in contrast to the usual Avalon ballroom atmosphere of gyrating energies. The chanting of Hare Krishna continued for over an hour, and finally everyone was jumping and yelling, even crying and shouting. Everyone is completely captivated by chanting when all of a sudden it ends. Prabhupada's voice booms out over the hum of amplifiers. Jai Om Vishnupadaya, Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa, Parivrajagacharya, Ashtatarashota, Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Ellen announces the next band, the Grateful Dead. Srila Prabhupada slips off stage, waving his way through the heavy smoke, an appreciative crowd, down the stairs and into the street, escorted by Kirtanananda and Rancher. This is no place for a brahmachari, he chuckles. The Avalon program is like a Namakirtana Yagya, Western style. Many interested people start coming to the classes. The temple becomes a landmark in the hay. Prabhupada rides the devotees in New York. Our yesterday's function was very successful. There were about 1,500 or more audience, and all of them chanted and danced continually for 1 hour and 15 minutes. I came back at 11:30 at night. Letter to Brahmananda, January 30, 1967. February 1967. Most of Prabhupada's San Francisco students are couples. He begins to give initiation, and many new Vaishnavas are created. He also marries the couples, like Malati and Shyamasundara, who know most of the bands and helped organize the mantra rock dance with Mukunda. Other initiated and married couples are Yamuna and Gurudasa, Govinda Dasi and Gurasundara, Nandarani and Dayananda, Krishna Devi and Subala. Harsharani Devi, Haridasa, Upendra, and Jayananda, the Kebi, also accept initiation. In his enthusiasm after initiation, Jayananda misunderstands the first instruction of his Guru Maharaja. Thinking that one round of japa is a round and back, he begins devotional service chanting 32 rounds a day while still driving his taxi. He can't understand why he's having such a tough time finishing his rounds. He sees everyone else getting their rounds done and finishing their other services as well. He has to stay up very late at night to finish. He begins to think there's something wrong with him. Why can't he finish his rounds on time? Still, he's so sincere. He does his 32 rounds along with his other services without realizing that he is chanting twice as many as other devotees. Several weeks pass before he finally understands the meaning of one round, and then he needn't chant 32. It's a humorous revelation, but he still remains very serious about his japa. Every morning in the temple, he chants very strong rounds with his eyes tight closed, his brow knit in intense concentration. Rocking back and forth, he is oblivious to the outside world. Nothing can disturb him from this meditation. Jayananda is different than the other devotees. Because he's about 10 years their senior, he feels like an older brother. After initiation, he continues driving his taxi and donates his earnings to help pay the temple overhead. Wherever he drives, he chants. Whenever he has the opportunity, he shares his realizations with his passengers. Back at the temple, he takes up any service that is required, from cooking to taking out the garbage. Prabhupada is very pleased with Jayananda's serious mood and sometimes invites him up for prasadam. Srila Prabhupada would cook prasada and serve me, he would recall. He didn't say anything, he just kept feeding me, and I kept eating. When asked how he got involved with the movement, he liked to say, I wasn't much of a religionist, but I was attracted to Srila Prabhupada. I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work with him. Guru Das. Jayananda and I grew up together in the movement. He was just the most unassuming, real, humble personage that you would want to meet. He didn't take on big airs or become puffed up with position. He was one of the few people working then, doing taxi cab work. I used to test him by asking where such and such street was, and he'd say yes, and start describing the houses on the street. He had a phenomenal memory of the streets of San Francisco. Mukunda. He wasn't always there because he would drive a taxi. With the money, he would look after everyone, clothe them, and fed them. He used to talk about how he had the BTGs in the front seat and how he'd preach to people while driving around town. I remember he said he used to drink. Whenever we'd talk about it, he'd say it was the most miserable thing he had ever went through, just his whole life up to that point. One of his schoolmates told me that he borrowed his grandmother's car one time, took a corner too fast, and rolled in. Srila Prabhupada is very popular among the Bay Area crowd, and Jayananda becomes his chauffeur, driving him to engage at the Himalayan Academy, Self-Realization Fellowship, and the University of California at Berkeley. At Stanford University, more than 300 students chant and dance with Prabhupada and the devotees for over an hour. The student newspaper describes the event as an ancient trance dance. There's a new dance about to sweep the country, the article reads. It is called the Swami. When Jayananda shows him the article, Prabhupada is pleased and requests him to make photocopies for reference. In Golden Gate Park, Kirtan is performed every Sunday afternoon at Hippie Hall with hundreds of young people dancing and chanting along. Prabhupada is satisfied that the youth of America is accepting the Maha Mantra. When a Mridanga arrives from India, he is optimistic that this will enhance the Kirtan and increase the crowds. Mukunda. When he played the clay Mridanga from India, it created a completely different feeling, akin to seeing an old friend after many, many years. It was so right and so natural. It was the very thing our kirtans had been missing, and it increased our feelings of ecstasy many times over. Obviously, Swamiji was in greater ecstasy than ever. You could sense by the way he held the drum, by the ease with which he brought out its intricate rhythms to control the kirtan, that this drum was like a long lost friend to him. Swamiji playing that drum was the talk of the community. Now we knew that what kirtan really was, how it was supposed to sound. Prasadam distribution also attracts the hippies. Many come to the temple for the morning lecture and stay for breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. The hippie hall crowd are homeless and really hungry, so they appreciate the temple as a refuge from the madness of the scene. The lunch program attracts the largest turnout. Malati does the shopping, persuading merchants to donate to the cause of feeding hippies. The cooks prepare full prasadam for 200 people. Some just eat and leave, but most want to meet the Swami. March 1967. One day, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears to Malati in a very unique way. Malati Devi Dasi. I had gone to this import store, Cost Plus Imports, down on the pier of San Francisco. At that time, we were so young and naive, enough to be completely entranced by anything that was made in India. Anything that said made in India became immediately attractive. I was going to pass the check out cashier, and I saw this barrel full of little objects. I glanced at them because they were curiously looking. I picked one up, and on the bottom of it was a magic sticker made in India. So I was immediately delighted. I was fascinated by those big eyes, so I took it home and put it on my mantelpiece. Later, Mukunda and Shyamasundar noticed the 3-inch doll sitting on the mantelpiece. Intrigued by the little personality with big round eyes and smiling face, they bring the little figure up to Swamiji. Instantly, Prabhupada gets down and pays his obeisances. They are astounded. Where did you get this? Who has brought? Malati. Bring her. They hurry out to tell Malati that Swamiji wants to see her immediately. Are there any more? Prabhupada says as soon as she enters the room. Well, yeah, lots of them, she replies, thinking of the barrel filled with little figures. No, I mean different. He holds up his fingers. Two. Yes. He turns to Shyamasundar. Can you carve? He indicates a 3-foot size. Shyamasundara confirms that he can carve. Actually, he is a wood sculptor. Prabhupada tells the whole story of Lord Jagannath and the Ratha Yatra festival held annually in Puri. Malati returns to the shop for the other 2 figures. Prabhupada had wanted to introduce deity worship, and now Lord Jagannath makes his own appearance to speed up the process. Lord Jagannath's advent is undoubtedly an auspicious omen. Prabhupada had come to the West to introduce Lord Chaitanya's movement, and the deities that Lord Chaitanya worshipped for 24 years in Jagannath Puri manifest in this way. Devotees do not consider this a mere coincidence. Malati Devi Dasi. He told us the story of the log floating up from the ocean. So Shyamasundar got the idea of this salvage yard down on the wharf where all kinds of wood come floating in from the ocean. So we went to the salvage yard and a funny thing happened. The guy said, Well, you can look around. So we looked around and found a beautiful piece of redwood. So we put the wood into our old panel truck. We looked and looked, but the guy wasn't around, so we finally just drove away with it. That was the beginning of Lord Jagannath in San Francisco. Somehow he chose a very unlikely person, such as myself, to manifest himself and make himself apparent to Srila Prabhupada's vision. Prabhupada brought him in a larger manifestation, of course. Under Srila Prabhupada's guidance, Shyamasundar takes up the service of carving Jagannath deities in his apartment. He has not yet given up smoking and occasionally lights up while he works. When Prabhupada comes in to inspect the work one day, he notices the cigarette pack on the top of Lord Jagannath. He compliments Shyamasundara on how nicely the work is coming along without making a comment about the cigarettes. After a brief visit, Malati escorts him to the door. Prabhupada motions to the cigarette pack and quietly mentions, "Such a small thing that is separating us from Krishna." A week later, a letter arrives from India with news about Radha Damodara. Sadly, the standard of seva at Radha Damodara temple has deteriorated to alarming proportions. Although far from the holy land of six Goswamis, Prabhupada is always thinking of Radha Damodara, where he spent so much time preparing for his preaching abroad. He always considered his Radha Damodara rooms as the hub of the wheel of the spiritual universe. This is from Vrindavan Days by Hayagriva Swami, page 57. Deeply concerned, Prabhupada urges his friend to immediately go to Vrindavan and make things all right. Please try to save the temple of Jiva Goswami, because in very near future, many people from all parts of the world will come to see the temple and samadhi of Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. As you are going to restore order in the temple, I am always with you, because Srila Jiva Goswami's temple is my heart and soul. If Radha Damodara desires, many Americans will go to see the holy place of Jiva Goswami in the very near future. Letter to Ripen Babu, March 18, 1967. This bold prediction concerning Radha Damodara will soon come to pass. Radha Damodara's desire to honor the word of their pure devotee is so strong that they will soon travel to America themselves to help Prabhupada fulfill the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we will stop here for today. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry for the mistakes I made in reading, because English is not my mother tongue, but I try. Usually my husband is here to help me, but now he was not. So next Monday we will continue, and I wish you all the best.